Garbuza, and I'm head of the Secretariat of the German Platform for the Reconstruction of Ukraine, hosting this event today. Before we start, I have two technical notes. Our event today will be held in English and Ukrainian with simultaneous interpretation. To select the language channel that suits you best, please click on the globe icon at the bottom right of the screen and select English or Ukrainian, Deutsch or Ukrainisch. Today's event will be recorded. By participating in the event, you agree that the recording will be published on our website afterwards. Some information about the German Platform of the Reconstruction of Ukraine. It is an initiative of the German government and brings together different actors based in Germany who are active or are interested in the topic of the reconstruction of Ukraine. In today's event, we will like to focus on the topic of mental health, and specifically mental health of boys and young men who are affected by the war in Ukraine. Plan International has recently published a study on this topic with the title Invisible Wounds: Navigating Mental Health Challenges and Support for Adolescent Boys and Young Men. And we are very happy today to welcome them as our guests and to present them present the findings of this study. But before I hand over to our guests, we have two short questions to you, our audience, to set the scene. To access the questions, please scan the displayed QR code using the camera function on your mobile phone, or go to www.menti.com via your browser and enter the PIN displayed on the slide. I'll give you a couple of moments to either scan the displayed code or use this web page, menti.com. And the first question I would like to ask the participants is, in one word, what comes to mind when you think about the mental health challenges faced by adolescent boys and young men affected by the war in Ukraine? What would you say, one word, when you think about this mental health challenge? We see already responses coming. Thank you for the active participation. And we see rather clearly that stigma, shame, pressure, trauma are the words we connect with this topic. Fear, stress, anxiety. You see there's a lot of rather deep words and emotions connected to it. Thank you a lot. And the question number two would be, what specific challenges do you believe Ukrainian adolescent boys and young men encounter when they seek mental health support? What challenges basically confront adolescent boys and young men when they try to get mental health support? We see that it is connected to the question number one, that feeling this stigma or feeling some shame can really prevent adolescent boys and young men to seek aid, to seek health support. Thank you a lot for participating. I would now like to hand over to Jana Kemmer from Plan International Germany for a short introduction of today's topic before we will dive into the discussion of the study results with the research team. Jana holds a Master of Science in Clinical Psychology and Master of Arts in Peace and Security Studies. She is a program specialist at Plan International Germany, working within the Ukraine response for Plan Germany since September 2022. Jana, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Andriy. Yeah, also a warm welcome from my side. Happy to be here today with all of you. Maybe briefly for those who don't know, Plan International is an international NGO focused on advancing children's rights. Plan works to promote child protection, education, health, and equality. And in some, maybe we can say we strive to ensure that all children have the opportunity to really reach their full potential and to live free from discrimination, violence, and poverty. From our perspective, all humanitarian interventions should be gender responsive. So that means they are tailored to the specific needs of people affected based on their gender, age, disability, and other factors. However, often we experience that activities and interventions do not take these specific needs into account, but rather offer a one-size-fits-all approach. While interventions in the field of mental health and psychosocial support in humanitarian responses rightly prioritize women and children who are disproportionately affected by the mental health impacts of war and conflict. It is also very important to recognize that adolescent boys and men face their own distinct psychological stressors and mental health challenges. Prevailing and harmful gender norms often assume that women are more emotionally vulnerable, while men do not require any psychological support. As a result, the specific needs of adolescent boys and young men are often overlooked. So this is also the case in the humanitarian response in Ukraine. Today, we will discuss the recent research Invisible Wounds: Navigating Mental Health Challenges and Support for Adolescent Boys and Young Men. This research was conducted by Plan International in East and Central Europe in partnership with Care International UK and the Romanian Federation of NGOs for the Child, with a participatory design, and we will hear more about that later. This research sheds light on how the ongoing war in Ukraine has affected the mental well-being of adolescent boys and young men across Ukraine, as well as Romania, Moldova, and Poland. And the research had two main objectives. The first one, to understand the mental health needs of adolescent boys and young men, and also to develop recommendations how to better address those needs. And second, to explore the current barriers preventing adolescent boys and young men in the context of the war in Ukraine from accessing mental health and psychosocial support services that might already be available. In sum, the study highlights the urgent need for gender-responsive mental health programming in humanitarian crisis. And therewith, I'm happy to hand over back to Andriy and then the research team to learn more about how we can ensure more inclusive and targeted support for all those affected.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jana. It sounds very, very interesting, and we are all curious to hear more about the research and the results of this study you mentioned. And I'm very happy to introduce two of my further guests from the research team who worked on this study and with whom we will now discuss the main findings. First of all, Teofana Cepoi. Teofana, welcome. She holds Master of Science in Trauma Psychology, specializing in clinical assessment and therapeutic intervention, as well as Master of Arts in International Development and Humanitarian Aid. And Teofana is the research manager at Plan International Romania, conducting the Invisible Wounds study. Teofana, welcome. And my second guest in our session now is Danilo Gnap. He is a child safeguarding officer at Unbreakable Ukraine Foundation in Poland, and he participated in the Invisible Wounds research as youth expert. Danilo, welcome. So before I start with my questions, I would also invite all participants to pose your questions either to Teofana or Danilo in the chat, and please specify the names to whom the question is directed. So, Teofana, maybe to start the question, why did Plan International decide to research adolescent boys' mental health, and what was main motivation of it?
Yes, thank you so much, Andrei, and thank you everyone for taking the time and energy to be here and discuss around this topic. And as we started, as my colleague Jana was saying, Plan International has been engaged in addressing gender inequalities in war and situations of displacement for a long time. But what we saw is that there's a critical gap in understanding the MHPSS needs of this group of adolescent boys and young men affected by war and forced displacement. And humanitarian programming, rightly so, focused on women and children. But sometimes we saw that this topic was overlooked in the sense of the specific vulnerabilities, the specific coping mechanisms these adolescent boys and young men are using. So the research started and is rooted in the recognition that this group needs tailored support. And why we started this is that we first understood that they navigate unique challenges, such as expectations around masculinity, perceptions around masculinity, social isolation, and concerns about conscription. And gender came out as one of the main focus, because although we focused on adolescent boys and young men, in our research we also spoke with adolescent girls and young women. And what we also understood and what motivated us from the very beginning is that unaddressed mental health challenges can also perpetuate cycles of violence. So we were not only looking at the individual level, although that was our main focus, but one of our motivation is that that's also impacting the sort of relationships young men are building with their families, with their peers, at the community level. Yes, so that's those are the main things that motivated us. It is an overlooked topic. There are unique and specific challenges this group is facing. And it's not just about this group, it's about the community at the community level and the sort of relational impact we see of war and forced displacement.
Thank you, Teofana. Danilo, could I invite you to share some of your background and experiences in working with young men in Poland?
Yeah, of course. As was meant, so thank you for joining today. It's a great pleasure to participate in it, in a project, in the research, and to share it with everyone. As Teofana and Jana said, that there is a big, it's rightfully so that women and children primarily get the mental support in Poland and in crisis response countries, because they're the main group of people who left the war, escaped the war. However, those children who were 10, 13, as the war goes on for the fourth year, 13 to 16, 16 to 19, they age up. And so at some point, the problem becomes that these men, boys who used to get access because they were considered children, they're not children anymore, they're young adults, therefore they just can't access the problem. Working with children, like in our organization, we see that there is a great need because, first of all, we could see that traumatic experiences, especially children and boys, the boys who escaped the war, especially from frontline territories or occupied territories, suffer more, as they might have experienced, near-death experience. We had such children who were in peaceful life, pre-war, pre-full-scale invasion, were happy boys who were interested in exploring the world. However, when they were trying to leave the occupied territories, or when it was occupied in the beginning of the war, they experienced like stress of, for example, shells from artillery landing near them, and it completely changed their behavior to more destructive behavior. And that is what was highlighted in this research. And when I was reading the findings, I clearly could see that there is a big like a spectrum from children be like seeking this destructive attention-seeking behavior to actually successfully integrating, finding friends, building communities in a class, within other organizations that provide humanitarian support, or just in a city. So we can see a big there are very big differences in either destructive behavior or actually like successful integration with other peers.
Thank you, Danilo. You already gave us some of the insights into the findings of the study. Theophana, I wanted to ask you actually to present the main findings of the study. So what was it? Maybe you can as well add something on the methodology and initial objectives of the research, so we can place it rightfully what the background of it.
Sure. I will start and tell you a bit about our methodology and how we started and what was the main idea, and then maybe jump into the main insights with a disclaimer in telling you that there are many nuances, and there in the topic and in the ages, looking at adolescent boys versus young men, looking at young men living in Ukraine versus in host countries. So there are many nuances. I will share some main insights, but I fully encourage you to go through the report to see the complexity of this topic. But how we started this research was with some main ideas. So we started with what are the main mental health challenges faced by Ukrainian adolescent boys and young men? How has the full-scale war and the displacement impacted their well-being and how they cope? But we also wanted to look at what's preventing them from seeking help. What are the sort of barriers they're facing, either logistical ones, either cultural or social ones? Then we also looked a bit at the existing interventions we're having and what's the uptake there, what are the challenges they're facing. But ultimately, this research is not meant to be academic in its sense, but it's meant to be utilized. So then we also looked a bit at the programmatic adjustments that we could be doing, and the sort of recommendations that we can do for different stakeholders. But looking a bit into the methodological side, I don't know if there's another slide. Sometimes it's easier to have the image around it, but if there's not. These are just some of the basic details, but it was done in 4 countries: Ukraine, Poland, Romania, and Moldova. We finished it a couple of months ago, and it was done both online and in presence. And in terms of the sort of tools we used, this research was predominantly qualitative. So we had interviews and focus groups with different groups. And I think those groups you also have somewhere in one of the slides for you to have a better image. So it was predominantly qualitative, but we also had 2 surveys. One was for adolescent boys and young men, and one was for service providers. In its nature, this research was participatory. So from the very beginning, the methodology was built alongside youth experts in all 4 countries, Danilo being one of them in Poland. So the methodology was built alongside with them, and at the end we also had validation workshops with the same youth experts in checking if the sort of insights we got align with their experiences, if there's things that we're missing. But we also had a reference group with technical experts in designing both the methodology and the final draft of the report. And although the main focus was on adolescent boys and young men, and that was the biggest number of participants. We wanted to look at the entire ecosystem. And I think the next slide perhaps has a better overview. Yes. So we also spoke with adolescent girls and young women to see how they experience, how their relationships have changed with young men, also at their caregivers, but we also wanted to look a bit at the formal support systems and what's their perspective on this topic and the sort of challenges and the sort of support adolescent boys and young men need. So we spoke with mental health service providers, with teachers, with school counselors, with local NGOs and international NGOs and research institutes. And ultimately, our final number, I think it's on the next slide, it's we reached almost 450 participants in our research. And out of those, around 200 were adolescent boys and young men that were part in or were different. They took part in different ways, either co-creating the research with us or through our qualitative or quantitative part of the research. This is a bit the structure that we started with. And some of the main insights, again, I'm going to share with you some, but out of also respect to the topic, I would also, I feel not pressure, but I would recommend you to read it so that you see a bit more the nuances around the topic. But if we look at the individual level, we see that Ukrainian adolescent boys and young men experience widespread psychological distress, and that's in the sense of emotional numbness, grief, exhaustion, difficulties concentrating and uncertainties about the future. But we also saw identity conflicts, especially for those living in host countries, either through feeling as outsiders, not fully connected to the host communities and not fully connected to their peers in Ukraine, but also identity conflicts looking at the developmental stage they're in, into wanting to seek more independence from the family members, but also feeling more responsible and supporting their communities and their family members as well. We also looked a bit at the impact on the relations this group, adolescent boys and young men, are building, and we saw that displacement has reshaped family dynamics, with many young men assuming responsibilities, supporting their mothers, their siblings, their communities, especially in the absence of fathers or in the absence of male role models. And while some found strength and resilience with these new forms of responsibilities, for others, it also was a form of pressure and led to social isolation. Also on the relational side, we saw friendships and peer networks being fractured. As I was saying, with many young men feeling disconnected from their Ukrainian and host communities, and many struggle to create social bonds. While others also face survivor's guilt over their relative safety abroad. And going a bit further into what our research was looking at, which was the barriers, we see that barriers in seeking help are still remaining on the logistical side. Of course, we saw limited availability of tailored MHPSS services, financial constraints, and lack of information. Many young men were telling us that we don't even know where to get that sort of information from. On the social and cultural side, as many of you predicted from the Menti question, stigma was one of the main barriers. Mental health stigma and connecting the sort of responsibilities they're taking on as not giving them space to also seek help. So understanding mental health challenges either through perhaps more as personal failures rather than normal responses to distress. But despite these challenges, young men have employed different coping mechanisms. We saw sports was one of the main coping mechanisms they were utilizing, volunteering, engaging in their communities, connecting with their loved ones. However, on the maladaptive or harmful side of coping mechanisms, we saw digital escapism, substance use, and social withdrawal. But one of probably the main insight is that we do need gender-sensitive interventions urgently, as also traditional gender norms and masculinity norms discourage help seeking and reinforce emotional suppression. So addressing this harmful gender norms while leveraging positive aspects of masculinity or the social construct of masculinity is, we understood that is key to fostering long-term mental health well-being. And I will stop here. But if there are many, well, if there are other questions, of course, we can dive a bit more into some of the aspects.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Teofana. As we told you, you are welcome as a participant. Place your questions in the chat and we'll be happy to discuss them shortly. Danilo, speaking about these barriers with regard to the access to mental health services, what are your experiences? Can you confirm what Teofana was talking about with regard to Ukrainian boys and young men?
Yes, unfortunately, I confirm it by 100% that is true, unfortunately. As speaking about Poland specifically, I'm not familiar with Romania or Moldova, how are the access to mental health services in those countries. In Poland, of course, we can see the stigma is still present, the lack of support for accessing mental health, but additionally, it also includes barriers, including just lack of mental health specialists in Poland, even for the host community. So in Poland, we're facing a problem that not just people, who seek safety from war in Poland can access it. Yeah, Ukrainians can access it. Even Poles themselves have issues accessing urgently. Let's say unfortunately, in some cases, you have to wait few weeks, in best case scenarios, it can take months to wait for, if you want to go through public funded hospitals, let's say. Additionally, it's the language barrier that we're facing. As I said, it interconnected with the lack of experts who work in MHPSS. We see that the amount of people who can, for example, not even speak Ukrainian, but even just speak English as a mental health supporter, a therapist, is already a small number. Those who can speak Ukrainian or Russian is even smaller. So we're facing this problem that if you want to access it, you can't. So if you really desperate or you really just need support, you might try to seek private psychological support. But for Poland, the prices are quite high, but you also have to unfortunately wait in line. Coming from personal experience, I had to seek, through online services that are available in Ukraine. But luckily I'm in a better condition that I was in Poland prior to the war. I had stable employment, language knowledge, so I didn't, I didn't struggle as much as people who have to drop everything and go. So it could be with the financial costs of the mental health services, if you seek private care, it can mount up, and it definitely gets a lot of it. It will add additional pressure to the family that is already struggling financially in Poland, trying to sustain, pay for apartment, pay for groceries, pay for other necessities for the family.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Danilo. Yeah, very interesting. Teofana, before starting the research or the study, I'm sure you had already, of course, some initial expectations or maybe some what to expect. Were there any, I don't know, surprises or something more of unexpected nature, what you learned from the study?
Mm-hmm.
Or what impressed you?
Yes, so once we started the study, we had a desk research to see a bit what's the framework we're working in, and we did see a lack of trust in institutions. So we were expecting that to see still that stigma, traditional gender norms. So some of the things, and also clinically, the mental health disorders, even before the war started in Ukraine, or suicide rates. So we could see let's say a vulnerability background, even in terms of substance use. But I think what also we tried with this research and what we saw in the past was this, I'm not going to say vulnerability focus, but in the sense that many of the reactions young men are having are normal reactions to distress. So we didn't want to pathologize these reactions and look at it clinically. So I would say what stood out the most, maybe not surprised us, but came out of so the distress and potential trauma and all the stressful factors. Yeah.
Teofana, I'm sorry to interrupt. Your connection is not so good. Maybe you can switch camera. So sorry, like last 2 sentences we could barely understand. Yeah.
I apologize.
Now it's good. Yeah, please
okay.
Go ahead.
Ultimately, I think what stood out the most is the resilience of this group in navigating their educational systems, their distress, their fractured friendships, their fractured family relationships. So I would say once we started the research, we were expecting to see many challenges and expecting to see many barriers. But what stood out the most was how resilient young men are in finding solutions and in finding ways to cope and navigate all these challenges.
Thank you. We have time for 2 questions from me, and then we can pick up on some questions I see already in chat. Maybe, Teofana, the most important lesson we should take away from this study, what do you hope we learn from it?
I will close my camera again then. I think the key lesson is that adolescent boys and young men need to be recognized as a specific group with unique mental health needs, also based on their age, also based on their gender. But ultimately, I think we want the study to serve as a call to action for donors, policymakers, NGOs, to invest in 1, gender sensitive, 2, trauma informed, and 3, youth-led mental health interventions. Yes.
Thank you, Teofana. Danilo, my last question to you would be, if let's say this topic would be in an ideal state, where the world, where young men's mental health was truly supported, what would that look like? What would you provide at first and to a much bigger extent, for example?
Well, I don't know. Unfortunately, can't imagine the perfect world like this, unfortunately. But I think what we can do, I think this report is a first step towards it, because now we have a research, a document that, shows why it needs to be supported. We as an NGO or other NGOs, alone or together in consortiums, can go to governments or to big donors and say, this is a problem, we have an idea how to improve it, we need support for that. I think what's important to understand is mental health support is an investment. If we're looking from government's perspective, it's an investment, because impact on mental health, like of deteriorating mental health, unaddressed mental health challenges, if we would take on the government side, it is decrease in the the labor, it's decrease in income, it's decrease in production and productivity. Yes, if we take from government's like position. So we have an opportunity to support those who need it. And I think, that mental health support should be universal. Like, of course, each individual, age groups, gender, past experiences, identities, they impact on how we see the world and what, support we need. It should be a tailored support. However, the mental health support should be provided to everyone, regardless of, their gender. If there is a need for, like, my university had this emergency, still has the emergency support, like mental health support. So it's like a crisis support. So you can reach out and you can go for a few sessions there to talk about your problems. I think such cases should be more promoted to show that, if you're in a crisis, you have a problem, regardless of who you are, you want to stay anonymous, it's not a problem. If you want to, share your name, who you are, you can also do that. But there is already someone who can support you for at least a few sessions until you just, try to look for a long-term support, or you think that something could be enough for you. So I think we should be more investing also in this emergency mental health support.
Thank you, Danila. Yeah, I see there are already quite some questions from our audience, and I see the first one is from Marta Ricci, Plan Germany, regarding the solutions, how can we overcome those barriers. Marta, would you like to formulate your question in person? That would be a chance
sure.
now.
And
Yeah, please.
good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for this wonderful presentation. So my question, and as I said in the question, actually, I know that might be disaggregated by country and an age group, but I was wondering if boys have actually shared solutions that they would like to see to overcome their negative coping mechanism that Stefana was talking about. Thank you for the answer.
Yes, thank you so much, Marta, for this question and giving me the opportunity to share what young men were telling us. So the solutions they were coming up with, there were many of them community-based, and many of them were mainstreaming mental health into the activities they already have. So one was sports. So finding spaces where young men are already spending their time and mainstreaming that. Is it sports? Is it educational hubs? Yeah, they were mentioning different spaces where they meet and integrating that. On one side, either faith-based interventions, finding communities, and so that was one thing, mainstreaming mental health into activities they're already doing. Another one was mental health ambassadors. So in regards to the stigma they're perceiving and they're internalizing, not just perceiving, was finding models in their digital space, in their online spaces, where young men do share about their struggles, where young men do speak about these challenges. And also, in that sense, building, of course, youth-led interventions, but also having more and more male facilitators. So having male role models in different aspects of their lives, including their their educational spaces or their psychosocial spaces.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We have more questions that came. One participant from GIZ is thanking for addressing this under-researched but extremely important topic. And the question is, did you observe any notable cross-country differences? And if so, how would you account for these variations?
Yes, the research is built by country, so there you can see specificities of each country. But I would say probably the biggest difference is you can see Ukraine and host countries. So in Ukraine, also the conscription law had a bigger impact. Also into the sort of relationships young men are building between themselves. Some of them are feeling abandoned. Some of them are feeling guilty in the relationship with the conscription law. So that's one thing I would account for. In the other countries, I would also, I think one layer that could explain the differences, for instance, from Poland to Romania or Moldova, is well, in Moldova also the Russian speaking, and they're feeling a bit more comfortable into integration in a sense, but also how the host community and the political narrative is around refugee and asylum seekers. So what we were hearing is that, for instance, in Poland, there was the discourse on more and more of sending even threats or sending young men back, of course, well, in the sense of misinformation, but still that sort of narrative is also impacting how they're feeling in the host countries and the sort of identity conflicts they're developing.
Thank you. We have only 3 minutes left, so I will just summarize the further questions we have. The one from Natalia Yakovenko, she was wondering if you considered in your report, you as well studied the effectiveness of existing programs suggested by MHPSS TWG in Ukraine, for example, Self-Help Plus or Problem Management Plus. Could you comment on this?
Yes. So when we spoke with specialists, we also spoke with people from the technical working group. So we spoke with, of course, CBT and trauma-informed CBT, but also people working with PM Plus, Self-Help Plus, more and even more community-based interventions, also art-based therapy. And movement-based therapy. So the people we spoke with had a lot of formats and different schools in terms of psychological support. I wouldn't say that we compared their effectiveness in a sense academically, but more asking adolescent boys and young men what they feel it's helping them more, but also service providers what they see it's more effective. So yeah, it's for each country on the subchapter of effectiveness of MHPSS interventions, you can also see it's not just CBT, it's the range of psychological support.
Thank you. We have as well maybe one question with regard to the outreach of this study. Maxim Vernihora was wondering if can you maybe comment outreach, especially in rural areas, to young boys and adolescents? Do you feel it could be provided, or there are limits in the study regarding this point?
Yeah, that came also as one of the biggest barriers because interventions are mostly urban-centric, but we also spoke with mobile teams going in rural areas. So that came out as a solution itself with some barriers, of course, into even going and reaching to the mobile teams. But that was an aspect that also came out in the research, and I'm very thankful, Maxim, that you also brought it up. Mobile teams came out as a possible solution for rural areas and closer to the front line as well.
Thank you. And my last question would be to both Danilo Teofana from Brigitte Völler. She writes that she assumes Ukrainian adolescent boys have specific challenges to develop future perspectives because they are trapped between the decision go back to Ukraine and get mobilized, or lose this perspective of going one day back to Ukraine. Did you have any insights or information about this aspect in your study? Could you comment, and then we will close for now the question and answer session. Who wants to start? Teofana, if you want.
I can start, or Danilo, if you want to start, and then I can back up.
I can maybe start with more like
Go ahead.
what I experience is working with children. What I see, we sometimes, check on our children, how are they feeling adapted in Poland, because we have like our organization is responsible for schools with the Ukrainian program in Poland. So we have children from 6 to 17, and many like those who are about to graduate from school, we're curious what their future will look like. Usually, like many of them, for some time being, plan to stay in Poland. However, some do plan on returning to Ukraine to pursue their higher education. Additionally, we see that around at least 50 to 70%, it really depends, on the time when we ask them. Many children want to actually return to Ukraine in their future at some point. After the war, they feel the need, the will to help Ukraine rebuild it. They feel connected to it. So there is a lot of uncertainty for them that is very clear that we can see, and that puts a lot of pressure on their mental health additionally, because they don't know where they want to be in Poland, elsewhere, maybe Western, more west in the EU, or back to Ukraine. This poses a lot of stress to them. So that is something that's was discussed during as helping as a youth expert, and that is something that we noticed, and maybe in the future maybe could be more studied, because it is sometimes could be overlooked. Yeah.
Thank you, Danilo. Teofan, a very short comment from your side, and we can go to the groups.
Yeah, just to mention that in the research there is a part looking how mobilization is impacting a sort of pressure that comes, and also visions for the future. So more details there, but I think what I would also add is that sort of pressure and that sort of decisions that they need to make, it's also impacting their friendships and the relationships young men are building within themselves, within their group. So some are feeling again abandoned, some are feeling shame around those decisions. It's specifically what you were mentioning in the question, and that's going to impact also how we build back community resilience if we also fracture the relationship young men have between themselves. But in the study there is a section specifically around visions for the future and that young men are sharing and military mobilization.
Thanks a lot. Those were really interesting questions, and we will have time for another short round of questions and answers at the end of the event. But for now, I would like to continue our discussion in smaller breakout groups that each focus on one specific aspect of this topic. We will have, as you can see, 3 groups in English for you, the audience, and 1 in Ukrainian. Please know that there will be no interpretation for the discussion in the small groups. However, the interpretation will resume once we all get back to the main plenary afterwards at around 3:10. And please also note that Chatham House rules apply to the discussion in the groups. It means you can use the information you gained, but without being specific from which person it came. The small groups will therefore not be recorded, and I invite you to choose now one of the following groups. Group 1 is on barriers in terms of MHPSS services accessibility. Katarina will guide this group in English. Group 2 focuses on social barriers and stigma. Teofana in English. Group 3 will be in Ukrainian, led by Marta, about community and belonging and support systems. Diana in English, Group 4. We will meet at roughly 3:10 back and main plenary. I wish you a lot of success and hopefully good insights in the small breakout rooms. See you later. Welcome back to the plenary. I hope you had fruitful discussions. And yeah, I would like you now to go back to Menti, via the QR code displayed right now on the slides and share some of the main insights from the breakout session. You can just write one word, one sentence. What do you take from the discussions? The same way, either QR code or use the link to Menti and the PIN code as posted in the chat. And we also have now time for additional questions to Danilo and Teofana. And I see there is still one question we haven't started, but you are welcome to share more. We will see if there are any insights from the group work.
I'm sorry, I don't know if it's just from my side, but when I enter the Mentimeter, it's the first question, not the... is
Okay,
what not the... or it's just me. Never mind. I apologize.
Yeah, we see
Maybe
there
I
are
can
some
just
coming.
quickly
Yeah.
jump in. I think you can move forward yourself. If you just type an answer to the first question, you will be directed to the next one.
Mhm. Okay, just some technical issue, but I see there are already some of the feedback coming with praising the participant and the provided insights into the work on the ground in Ukraine and some of the topics like capacity building on MHPSS at the community level and of course solutions and outreach programs. Thank you for sharing it with us. We will take this for our documentation and will consider it while planning further events on this topic. Thank you. Now I would like to jump back to the questions and use the 5 minutes left to the questions we are still having and which haven't been answered yet. And we have one question from Inga Nira from GIZ regarding the methodological approaches for the target groups. If you were using as well gamification apps, or you were concentrating more on traditional therapy approaches. Teofana, it may be you would be the right, and I will ask Inga if you want to formulate your question, you can do it right now, otherwise Teofana can try to answer it.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Perfectly done, perfectly read. And we also actually took up the question in our breakout group, so
okay.
yeah.
But Teofana, if you want to share some of the insights, so go ahead now.
Yes, so when we were reaching out to service providers, we opened the discussion for everyone. We spoke with hotlines and with some digital platforms, some using AI, but in reality, I think that's a great idea, using gamification. We didn't focus only on traditional approaches, but for sure there wasn't the same number of research participants that were using alternatives and digital options, and virtual reality, no one was using it from the people we spoke with. But I think that's a really, really great point. Inga was also part of the group, of our group, so she also shared some of the ideas for young men who self-isolate or who self-isolate.
Thank you. I see there are no more questions left, which is a sign for me you had good conversations and the answers on the previous questions were quite insightful. Thank you a lot. So yeah, we are coming to the end of our session. I would like to thank you a lot for the discussion and would like all of you to come for the last time to Menti.
Sorry,
yeah.
I think we still got a last minute question.
Oh, sorry. Now I can see it.
Two more.
Thank
now
you.
they are coming.
Thank you, Katarina. Yeah, I see there are two questions there. So Brigitte Völler, maybe you can ask your questions in person if you want.
Yes, as we are talking also about marginalized group, I would be interested whether they were included in your study, adolescents from marginalized group, LGBTIQ or ethnically marginalized, and whether you identified specific challenges or do they formulate specific challenges, specific needs if they were part of the study?
Yes, so that was one of the first things we started with. We wanted to have as much diversity in our respondents as possible. Unfortunately, although we had targeted outreach, it was very hard to reach minority groups. But we did speak with some, especially in the surveys, they responded with the LGBTQI+ community, people living with disability, and the Roma minority. But most of the insights, unfortunately, weren't coming from them directly, as there weren't many participants, but either from service providers working directly with them or from their families, so their caregivers, their sisters. So we do have a part in the research specifically looking at their challenges per group. And yeah, they, for instance, for the LGBTQI community was an idea where one of the biggest needs is into finding safe spaces for them to express, aside from mental health, but also finding safe spaces to also have this sort of coping mechanism within their communities and within speaking with their loved ones. For those living with disabilities, logistical barriers, for those living with mobility disability, logistical barriers was one of the biggest challenges, and what service providers were giving us as potential solutions were the mobile team interventions. We also looked at the Roma community with the extra discriminations they're facing, especially in the shelters in host communities, which is adding, of course, to all three groups, but also to this specifically, it's adding vulnerabilities, but also other vulnerabilities to the groups, for instance, for literacy levels and finding mental health interventions that are not only their language-based courses around mental health. Those were some solutions that were coming from Poland. So yeah, there is a limited space in the study. Unfortunately, limited because it was very difficult to reach these participants. Even if with targeted outreach, but for sure there is a need for more study around the challenges and the specific solutions we can think for.
Thank you, Teofana. We have one more question from Mr. Shoaib Barenmeer. If you would like to tell your question in person, otherwise I can read it for you.
Hello.
Yeah.
I was just curious to know if the diaspora play any role to the young men and boys inside Ukraine, since they have moved to a relatively safe environment, and there might be family members or friends who are separated and live outside Ukraine, and whether they play any role on this, and if yes, has there been any discussions and any studies on this so far? Thank you.
The relationship between that was something we also looked at, the sort of relationships built between countries and the diaspora and the young men in Ukraine. For sure, the diaspora is supporting either through fund and volunteering. Many young men were telling us that once they moved, they started supporting even more financially, however they could, their peers in Ukraine. But we also, as I was mentioning before, we also saw some disruptions in the sort of friendships and in relationships, and that comes with a lot of guilt for those living in host countries, for some, and that comes with feelings of abandonment by those still staying in Ukraine. As I was saying at the beginning, I feel that many parts of the research are very complex and have nuances, because again, for some you see more and more support and finding ways to still connect through online and maintain their friendships. For others, that meant polarization and a bit more fracturation in the sort of relationship people are building. But I would say that's not only specific to Ukraine. What we see from academic research is that collective trauma often leads to relational dysfunction and disruption and polarization.
Thank you, Teofana. I wanted as well to thank you, Olena Yaremenko. You expressed your interest to support this research in Germany. We're, of course, very happy to hear about your initiative and receive your signals for cooperation and networking. Yeah, we actually run already out of time, and there's only 5 minutes left for us to say thank you to our guests for your precious insights and for all the discussions, and invite all the participants to go back once again last time to Menti for short feedback on today's event. It will help us to structure better the program, to look what you are still missing, or to receive some enforcement what we should keep doing. So if you feel like giving your feedback, please scan the QR code or go with the Menti on the same page. And there are 4 questions. You can answer them in the next half an hour. So there is no stress with that, because some of these questions might require as well a little bit of time, and we really appreciate it since it gives us the impulse what we can do better and how we can improve in the further events. And otherwise, I would like as well to point out that the platform of the reconstruction of Ukraine will have some interesting events on disinformation on April 24 and on inclusion on April 29. You can get the information via our website or using the QR code. In the end, we would also like, of course, to invite you to subscribe to our mailing list or join our LinkedIn group. And you've got all the addresses and the link to the LinkedIn group right now posted. Otherwise, my sincere thanks goes to Plan International and to Teofana and Mitro for participating and for giving this precious insight to our community. I wish everyone good afternoon and see you next time. Bye-bye.